today we'll be talking about the civilizational perspective. So I'll give you a brief outline what is called the civilizational perspective, and then we'll go to specifically Surjit Sinha and N.K. Bose. So the first point what I'm going to discuss today is civilizational perspective. What is called civilizational perspective and how it is used in sociology. Civilizational perspective tries to understand society through its complex historical and interconnected cultural and social system, focusing on the interplay of little and great tradition. Let me explain this point. So civilizational perspective helps you to understand society. First point. That means through this perspective we can understand society. This is one. So one way to understand society is civilizational way. How? When you say that you are trying to study society through civilizational way, it means you have to understand the nature of the society, which is complex. So complex of nature of society has to be understood through civilizational perspective or through civilization. This is one. But you may have a question, sir, what is called this complex nature of society? The society is complex by nature, by its character. What does it mean when I say that society is complex by its nature and character? That means you don't have a single lens, or you can't use a single lens to look at society. Forget about society. Think about an individual. Think about an individual. Individual, when he is a child, he may not be that very complex. But as long as he grows, acquainted with society, meet people, develop his understanding, he tries to be very complex in nature. Individuals and their characteristics are also complex in nature. Think about any example. At times you may feel difficulties to understand. At times I feel difficult to understand you as my student, because at times you behave in a particular manner, in other times you behave in other manners. So complexity is there in the characteristics of individual, and complexities you can find in society. To understand the complexity, civilizational way is one of the approaches to understand it. So now, when I say that society is complex, it means it has to be understood in the context of present as well as history. This is the first characteristics of complex nature of society. So the complex nature of society is to locate the present society in its historicity, in its historical context. What does it mean? Present society has to be located in context of history. You may have a doubt here, sir, what kind of history you are talking about? History has three parts largely: ancient history, medieval history, and modern history. So what kind of history you are trying to talk about? Isn't it? So that itself is a complex phenomenon. Understanding history is also not that very easy, because you are talking about ancient society, you are talking about medieval society, you are talking about modern society. Which kind of history? What kind of history we are connected with? I think when we say civilizational perspective, I specifically mean that you have to take all these histories into consideration. Actually, when we talk about civilization, civilization is not built in a year or in 10 years or in 20 years. No, it has a long history. So it has a long history. Therefore, you have to connect with the ancient history to the modern history, the present society. So that connections makes the entire process complex, and the complexity has to be elaborated and analyzed through this civilizational approach. What I've said, that the complex nature of society has to be understood through history. Secondly, it has to be understood through its interconnectedness. Interconnectedness with whom? Interconnectedness of culture and social system. How culture and social system is interconnected, I think that has to be studied and understood in the context of history. It is a difficult question altogether. Interconnectedness between culture and society. Now, what does it mean? Moreover, society and culture are two sides of the coin, we can say like this. That means culture and society are interdependent, interrelated, interconnected, and it is very difficult to make a separation between society and culture. So society and culture are intertwined with each other. You know, Take the example of an individual. If you talk about an individual, and if I refer to Radhakund Mukherjee, what he said, you can't separate the values from an individual. So individual has to be understood through his values and through his value commitment, through his understanding. So the point here is any society has its own values and cultural ethos. So these values and cultural ethos need to be connected with each other. You can't separate these two. If you separate, then it will be misleading what Radhakund Mukherjee said yesterday. It will be unreal to understand. So values, culture, ethos, and society are intertwined with each other and interconnected with each other, interdependent with each other. So therefore, it has to be understood in the context of this interconnectedness between culture and society. But the problem here is, you may have a question to me, sir, what is culture? So culture is a complex whole. Complex whole means it includes values, it includes institutions, it includes morality, it includes laws. All these things are part of culture. This is one definition. If you go to the other definitions, culture has two aspects. Culture has two aspects. One is called material culture and the other one is called non-material culture. So you must be knowing what is called material culture and what is called non-material culture. And if you refer to Ogborn's definitions, there is a concept he has given called cultural lag. That means the material culture which is progressing or which is changing very fast than the non-material culture. So non-material culture is essentially about your values, about your ethos, about your norms, about your societal perceptions. I think these things takes time to change, but the material culture changes very fast. And to making a pace between these two, he says there is something called cultural lag. That means you are modern by your technology or by your appearance, but as far as your thought is concerned, as far as your understanding is concerned, you are little stereotype, I can say. So the point here is, he says about cultural lag. That means material culture and non-material culture. Material culture goes fast and it changes very fast than your values, beliefs, and attitude. So civilizational approach helps us to understand society, number one, by understanding the complexities involved in history, the complexities involved in culture, the complexities involved in social system. All these things are helpful, or all these things are added together, which is called civilizational approach to understand society. If you make it much more specific, then what you will see that there is an interplay between little and great tradition, which explains cultural continuity and integration. This is the second important point what I am trying to say, that the nature of society is complex. The history also is a complex. Society is complex. Culture is also complex. But these complexities has to be understood by one approach called civilizational approach. How it can be done? The first point is to focus or to find out or to draw the outlines of the interplay between little and great tradition. And this interplay between little and great traditions, which helps or will enable you to explain the cultural continuity and integrations. What is called cultural continuity and integrations? And what is called little tradition and great tradition? I am sure that you must be knowing what is called a great tradition and what is called a little traditions. And these concepts were given by Robert Redfield. I discussed it when I was talking about the cultural perspective or cultural approach to understand Indian society when I was giving the introduction to it. So little tradition and great traditions. So little traditions are becoming part of great traditions. So that means little traditions are moving further and becoming part of greater traditions. So you must have some examples in your mind what is called the little tradition, how it is becoming greater tradition, how there is a cultural continuity. Now think about any cultural traits or any cultural festival. Now it has the cultural festival which is celebrated in local level for that matter. But now it is celebrated, or now it is becoming, for that, take the example of Ganpati festival, which has you celebrated very recently. But largely, if you talk about Ganpati festival, it was there part of Indian freedom struggle. Bal Gangadhar Tilak has popularized this Ganpati festival, of course, which was largely confined to Maharashtra. But in today's context, if you look at Ganpati festival, so it has become a pan-Indian, not only pan-Indian, it's a global celebration. So the point I'm trying to say, it was part of little tradition, but now it has become part of great tradition, which is confined to Maharashtrian society, but now it has part of the great traditions, means it has become a pan-Indian celebrations or pan-Indian festivals and cultural activities revolves around these two. So therefore, think about Chhat Puja also. It was largely confined to Eastern Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, but now it has been celebrated across the globe. So therefore, little tradition becoming great traditions. Therefore, there is a cultural continuity, and that brings integrations, that integrates society, that integrates people, that integrates civilizations, that brings people. So cultural continuity can look at when you see how little traditions are becoming great traditions. So little traditions are becoming, you can refer to Yogen Sikh's book where he has talked about little traditions and great traditions. I think Modernization of Indian Tradition, that book, there is a tabular presentation where he has given the summary of Modernization of Indian Tradition, where he also talks about cultural continuity and integrations. So that cultural continuity and integrations, there also is categorical mention, little traditions are becoming great traditions. So little traditions and great traditions are merging together, or little traditions are becoming part of great traditions, suggesting there is a cultural continuity and there is a cultural integration which is taking place. And this particular very approach of cultural continuity and integrations has influenced N.K. Bose and Surjit Sinha to talk about civilizational perspective. This very approach called how little traditions are becoming part of great traditions, how there is a cultural continuity from or within little tradition to great traditions, or how we can see little traditions are becoming part of great traditions, suggesting a kind of cultural continuity, suggesting a kind of integration, which has helped N.K. Bose and Surjit Sinha to think about a perspective called civilizational perspective to understand society. So that means what is the key of this analysis? The key of the analysis is to locate the cultural continuity between little tradition and further beyond to great traditions. I think one definition I forgot to mention, when we talk about culture and civilization, there is a definition, very popular definition. What we are is our culture and what we have is our civilization. So what does it mean if you look at this particular definition? So it also refers to how these little traditions are becoming the part of greater traditions, and how there is a cultural continuity, and you can look at the integration in this. So this very approach has influenced Surjit Sinha and N.K. Bose. But what they have done basically, Surjit Sinha and N.K. Bose, what they have done. Let me summarize their understanding. Surjit Sinha and N.K. Bose analyze historical records. If you look at historical records, it will provide an account of history of your district, and you must know about your district. So Surjit Sinha and N.K. Bose have analyzed these historical records. Gazetteer is one such record which suggests the historical nuances of your district, the historical aspects of your district. The second point, what resources they have used, Surjit Sinha and N.K. Bose, is called the administrative data. What is called this administrative data? So if you visit any district or any part of the country, you will find that initially these districts were under the rule of certain kings, or it was largely a princely state, and the princely state has a king, and even today you can see their palace. It's there across the country. There you can find the administrative data, or there is a linkages between the administrative data of this princely state followed by the British, then followed by the present governance system. So administrative data is one such important sources which provides you basics to understand about the culture and civilization, cultural and civilizational continuity of that particular area and locality. So if you are interested to specialize in civilizational perspective, you must have this kind of attitude to look at historical records. You must find out the classical text involved in this, and you also refer to the administrative data, and these three sources will reveal how different the social structure and the cultural practices of that particular locality or that particular caste or that particular village life or that particular religion or that particular matter for region, which is connected with all this. So making a connection with history and present, I think these tools are very important. All that is connected with thread of unity. That means how there is a unity exists from last 300 years, 400 years or 500 years and today. So you can see the connectivity, the historical connections, the historical junctures, the historical continuity, whatever you are interested to study with, but you can locate the connectivity and how this historical connections, how this change and continuity, how this integration has taken place. I think that will help you to understand. So therefore, there is a thread of unity you can see through this civilizational perspective. So what I'm trying to argue, that if you are interested to adopt this particular method called civilizational approach, you must look at these three. So now let me make it clear what are the key aspects of this civilizational perspective. What are the key aspects? I think with these key aspects I'll stop today. The first aspect is it is focusing on continuity and change. When you say that continuity and change, one important word you have to remember, that how societies and cultures have evolved over the time, emphasizing the continuity in traditions and structural support system and practices. This is the first point, how society culture evolved over a period of time, number one, and that evolvedness of society and culture focuses on how we continue with such kind of traditions and structural support system which is still continuing with the culture and cultural practices and historical societies. That means you can see the continuity, how change has occurred, but it maintains its continuity with the change what you have seen today. For example, Taj Mahal, you must be knowing about Taj Mahal. Don't you see that Taj Mahal is suggesting Taj Mahal was built long back? Think about that. But you can have this continuity with today. You can't deny that India was once upon a time ruled over by the Mughal empire. And if you go to your Lucknow for that matter, Imambara, they have where all these kings, this hat and other things sold and everything is there. It is still preserved, and there is an archaeological survey of India which has taken the responsibility to maintain all these things. So that's the point I'm saying. You can connect with the continuity and change. But how change has taken place, but we can't deny with the past, we can't deny with the history, how there is an interplay between the little tradition and great traditions. So certainly it focuses on continuity and change. Second important aspect of civilizational perspective is little and great traditions. I think the core concept of little and great traditions examines the relationship between small scale local traditions and the larger and more formalized cultural patterns, means great traditions. Small scale local traditions becoming part of larger and more formalized cultural patterns, that is called great traditions, which explains how the cultural elements circulate and how these cultural elements are getting integrated. So therefore, the second key aspect of civilizational perspective is about little and great traditions. And how little traditions means small scale traditions are, the local traditions are becoming the larger and more formalized cultural patterns and traditions which integrates or which suggest about the cultural change and integrations. The third important point is interdisciplinary approach. This perspective, interdisciplinary approach, draws from various disciplines including history, anthropology, indology to analyze the range of cultural traits and processes. So to analyze the cultural traits and processes, they focuses on specifically the civilizational aspects, focuses on interdisciplinary approaches, taking a clue from history, anthropology, indology, and making a reference to analyze the broad range of cultural traits and processes. And the fourth key point, maybe the last point, is emphasis on Indian society. The civilizational approach largely focuses on Indian society. This perspective is particularly prominent in the study of Indian society, specifically the civilizational approach, where scholars have used to challenge Western categories of society, highlighting the uniqueness and synthesis aspects of diverse culture of India. So civilizational approach largely focuses on Indian society and how these Indian societies are evolved through the period of history, and it has a long civilizations, and these civilizational roots are very strong and very rigid if you look at the civilization of India. So therefore it challenges the Western categories of understanding society, specifically Indian society, saying that Indian society is a unique society. It has its own unique characteristics, it has its own cultural diversity, and it has its own cultural patterns. I think all these cultural patterns and diversities need to be understood, and through civilizational aspects or through civilizational perspective, we can look at it in a much more stronger manner.